Hi again, it's Jossie from One Project Closer, and in this section we're going to be talking about the basic technique for modern hand lettering. I'm going to be using my Tombow dual brush marker. On one side it has a nice felt brush marker, and on the other side it has a fine tip. The basic technique is fairly easy. Every time you go down, that's called your downstroke, you're going to use heavy pressure. And you can see just how thick I can really make the stroke using this dual brush pen. So you'll find this blank piece of paper in your resources, and you can print this out as many as you want and just practice. You can see that I can get a really thick downstroke. Now for our upstroke, and this is where it takes some practice. In my opinion, I think the upstroke is even harder than your downstroke. So you'll want to just practice going up and using a really light technique. I think that the hardest part of hand lettering is retraining your brain that every time you go down, you're going to use a heavy stroke. And every time you go up, you're going to use a light stroke. You'll find that as you're writing words and designs, your brain will sort of go back to what it's always been taught, which is one constant pressure. So I've noticed that a lot of people often go back to using a medium stroke all the time. But the beauty in modern hand lettering is to really have the difference between the dark and the light stroke. So it's really important to master this. And really the only way to master it is to build muscle memory and practice, practice, practice. So once you've practiced using your thick downstroke and then your light upstroke, both straight lines and diagonal lines, I always suggest starting with the letter L or a swoop. And I found that this is where people all of a sudden realize how hard it is to put these two strokes together. There's a couple of things to be aware of. The first thing is, when do you switch? This is one of my most common questions asked. When do you switch from light to heavy? And I would say you slowly do it. So when I'm going around the top, you'll see that I don't really start getting heavy till I've already started making the loop. And then before I make the bottom loop, I give up on the pressure even before I hit really the bottom of the stroke. So that's really important. The other thing that I find really important as you're doing hand lettering is this swirl action. You'll see that I'm sort of swirling my brush in a circular motion. And even I encourage people to warm up your hand. If you find that you're having a hard time really swirling it, go ahead and practice. Okay, so you'll see that I'm using this sort of motion rather than only using my hand to move the pen. I'm swirling my fingers rather than swirling the whole pen. The other thing that is so important in hand lettering is to make sure you're holding your pen to the side. And you'll notice if you're someone who holds their pen straight up and down, this is going to be harder because you're locking your wrist. And really, you want to keep your wrist and your fingers all very loose and fluid. So it's really important to hold the pen to the side. If you notice that you're pressing down hard and you're still not getting a really thick stroke, hold it more to the side. And you can see the difference between holding it up and pressing it down and holding it to the side and pressing it down. You will get even thicker stroke holding it to the side. Now, this is especially hard to retrain your brain to do, especially if you're a lefty. So practice, practice, practice. Again, this isn't going to come overnight, but you will get better and better and better every time you practice. Every time you practice, you're training your brain to do it in a different way. So again, we're going to keep swirling around, and then you can start linking your loops. And I think this is really important too, to practice. If you find that you have shaky lines, there's a couple of things you can do. One, in hand lettering, the other side of the tip is great for cleaning up your marks. So you can always go back and sort of clean up any shaky lines or where the pressure was a little too light. Go back and clean them up. The other thing you can do is try switching pens. I like the Fudenosuke from Tombow also. It's a much thinner pen, but I tend to use it when I'm using smaller projects, not big ones, like if I'm lettering an envelope or something like that. I also really like the Pentel sign brushes, and you can see they come in all sorts of beautiful colors, but they're really smooth and crisp, and I really like them. And they also, I like the inks are still pretty saturated. The other thing you can do, in addition to switching up your brush, you can take a small piece of paper and put it underneath your hand so that it will move along the paper. So if your hand is sort of catching on the paper, having another piece of paper underneath will help it go smoothly. That guard piece of paper is also really, really nice if you're a lefty, because these are water-based markers, and you might find that occasionally if you're moving too fast, you might rub your hand through the marker. So all that to say, use a guard. You can try using a guard sheet of paper. You can change up your pen and go slower. That's the other thing that I've found, that if I'm trying to go too fast in my design, or I don't know where I'm going, like if I haven't sort of planned out how I'm going to form the letter or where I'm going to put the letter, I tend to go a little bit, I get jaggy. I get my letters get a little crooked and jagged. And also, so slow down. That's a big tip. Slow down. If your letters are starting to get jagged, slow it down. The next thing I would suggest is keep practicing. If your letters are shaky in places, it might be because your brain doesn't have the muscle memory to finish yet. So keep practicing, and you're going to get better every time you practice. I've even found if I've stopped practicing for a while, I go back to the way I used to write, and so I need more practice. So don't be afraid to keep practicing. Try using a guard sheet of paper. Try using a different pen, and go slow. And practice, practice, practice. So that is the basic technique for hand lettering. Don't forget to join us in the next section on how to form your letters, including the different elements of hand lettering and different styles of hand lettering, and how to accent your hand lettering. We'll see you in the next section.